The winter sky hung heavy with rain, a gray curtain stretching into infinity. Gusts of wind whipped flurries of snow against the glass windows of St. Mary's Hospital, where faint lights burned through the night, a fragile beacon amidst the dreary expanse. Tonight, inside the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, NICU, the fight for life continued minute by minute, second by second, in a silence so profound one could almost hear the ticking of time itself. Grace Thompson, a young nurse with deep blue eyes and a patient, quiet demeanor, sat on a small chair, her hands clasped together. The clock edged closer to 2 a.m., a time when everything in the hospital seemed to slow down, leaving only the steady hum of ventilators and the rhythmic beeps of medical monitors. Each sound was a reminder of the fragility of the tiny souls nestled in the glass incubators. Grace quietly approached Lily, a premature baby born at just 28 weeks. Lily's body was so small it seemed she might shatter at the lightest touch. Her paper, thin skin revealed delicate veins beneath, and her breaths were so faint they could almost vanish in the still air. Each time Lily's heartbeat slowed, Grace held her breath too, silently praying. "Come on, little one. We'll get through tonight together," Grace whispered, her voice soft, as if afraid to break the fragile calm. She gently adjusted the small blanket around Lily, her eyes never leaving the monitor tracking the baby's erratic heart rate. Grace had been doing this long enough to know that miracles in medicine didn't always come from drugs or state of art machines. Sometimes they came from the incredible resilience of tiny lives and the unconditional care born of love. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew through the hallway, nudging the NICU door to creak slightly. Grace frowned and turned her head. She knew the hospital doors were always locked at night, especially in sensitive areas like this. Outside, the winter storm raged, and no one could possibly enter without clearing security. She walked over to the door and opened it slightly, peering down the long, dimly lit corridor. There was no one, only the faint yellow glow of lights reflected off the cold, sterile floor, and the distant howl of wind, like a song from another world. Grace shrugged, assuming someone had left the door ajar. But then she felt it. Something was different. When she turned back, Grace froze. Standing in the middle of the NICU, right beside Lily's incubator, was a golden retriever. The dog's golden fur shimmered faintly in the dim light. Its ears drooped gently, and its deep brown eyes held an ocean of emotion as it gazed intently at the incubator. Its presence was surreal. There had been no sound, no footsteps, no trace. It was as though the dog had always been there, an apparition untouched by the sterile clinical environment. How did you get in here?" Grace whispered, her hand unconsciously rising to her chest as her heart pounded. The dog didn't bark or appear startled. It simply stood there, stepping quietly closer before pausing by Lily's side. Tilting its head slightly, its eyes were filled with a softness and sadness that Grace couldn't quite comprehend. "No way," Grace murmured as her eyes darted to the monitor. Lily's heart rate, which had been erratic all night, was now steady, calm even. The numbers on the screen reflected a quiet stability that hadn't been there before. Grace knelt beside the dog, her gaze shifting between it and Lily. "What did you just do?" The dog looked at her serenely, as though no explanation was needed. A warmth spread through Grace's chest, a strange, peaceful sensation she had never felt before. In all her years as a nurse, she had never encountered anything like this. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, Grace remained by Lily's side. The golden retriever lay calmly at her feet, its eyes half closed, as though guarding the world itself. At that moment, Dr. Thomas Gray, the head of pediatrics, entered the room. He stopped abruptly, his stern expression darkening when he saw the dog. His thick eyebrows drew together in confusion and disapproval. "Grace, why is there a dog in the NICU?" His voice broke through the quiet like a thunderclap. Grace stood quickly, instinctively shielding the dog. "Dr. Gray, I don't know how he got in, but he's not just any dog. Look at Lily's heart rate. It's been stable since he showed up." Dr. Thomas glanced at the monitor, his stern eyes flickering briefly with surprise. But he shook his head sharply, his tone firm. "Grace, this is a hospital. We cannot have a dog roaming around a sterile unit like this. Take it outside immediately." "But doctor, he's done no harm. I think there's a reason he's here," Grace pleaded, her voice wavering. "Enough, Grace. Don't let your naive beliefs interfere with your work," Dr. Thomas snapped before turning and striding out of the room, leaving an uneasy silence in his wake. Grace knelt down and gently patted the dog's head, her eyes filled with determination despite her confusion. "Don't worry. I'll protect you. We'll figure out why you're here." The golden retriever looked up at her with those soulful brown eyes, as though he already knew what lay ahead. Outside, the hospital hummed to life with its usual morning routine. But inside the NICU, something extraordinary had happened. Something extraordinary had happened. Something no science could explain. And Grace knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning of an incredible journey she was about to share with the mysterious dog named Max. The early morning sunlight filtered softly through the glass windows of the NICU, carrying with it a gentle warmth on an otherwise frosty winter day. Inside, the room remained quiet as always, filled with the rhythmic hum of machines and the fragile breaths of the tiny babies in their incubators. But today, in one quiet corner of the room, something was different, an inexplicable presence that brought with it a sense of peace and wonder. Max, the mysterious golden retriever, still lay calmly beside Lily's incubator. His deep brown eyes were fixed on the tiny newborn, as if silently offering her some invisible strength. Lily, the premature baby who weighed little more than a single kilogram, was fighting for her life with every breath. Each delicate exhale felt like a whisper between life and death, keeping the doctors and nurses in a constant state of tense vigilance. Grace Thompson, the young and passionate nurse, sat close to Lily's incubator. She hadn't taken her eyes off the surreal scene all night. Lily's heartbeat, previously so irregular that it had the entire NICU on edge, had become mysteriously stable since Max appeared. The monitor displayed a steady rhythm, and Lily's tiny body seemed calmer, as though wrapped in an unseen cocoon of comfort. Grace smiled softly, hope shining in her tired eyes. She looked down at Max, gently running her hand over his soft golden fur. "Who are you, Max? And how are you making this happen?" Max, of course, didn't reply, but his eyes met hers with a quiet gentleness that seemed to say, "Trust me, everything will be okay." The door to the NICU swung open suddenly, breaking the peaceful stillness. The sound of brisk footsteps and a deep voice filled the room. Dr. Thomas Gray had arrived. The head of pediatrics, a man who placed absolute faith in science, walked in with his usual air of authority. "Grace, that dog is still here." His voice was sharp with disapproval as his eyes landed on Max, beside Lily's incubator. "Dr. Gray," Grace replied, trying to remain calm as she stood up to face him. "Please look at Lily's heart rate. She's been stable since last night. Her condition has improved significantly. I can't explain it, but I believe Max has something to do with it." Dr. Thomas stepped closer to the incubator, his sharp gaze shifting to the monitor. Sure enough, Lily's vitals were better than they had been in days, but he shook his head, his brows furrowing deeper. "Grace, you honestly believe a dog is influencing the baby's condition? This is a hospital, not a place for superstition or emotion." "But the proof is right in front of us," Grace nearly burst out. I watched her all night. When Max is here, Lily is calm. It's like she feels comforted. Dr. Thomas closed his eyes for a brief moment, trying to remain patient. It could be a coincidence. You know, we can't rely on anything that isn't scientifically proven. I'll speak to hospital administration. This dog cannot stay here any longer. With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Grace standing still, her heart sinking. She looked down at Max, her voice soft and defeated. "What do we do, Max? I know you've helped Lily. I just don't know how to make them see it." Max, as if understanding her distress, shifted closer to her, resting his warm head on her knee. The simple act made Grace's heart soften. She took a deep breath, promising herself she wouldn't give up. Throughout the day, word of the mysterious dog in the NICU began to spread across the hospital. Some curious nurses and doctors stopped by to see for themselves. And strangely enough, they, too, felt something unusual about Max. Head nurse Emily, a stern woman with decades of experience, murmured to Grace while watching Max quietly lie beside Lily's incubator. "I'm not one to believe in miracles, but after 30 years in this job, I've never seen a dog bring such a calming presence. It's hard to explain." Even patients and visitors from other wings heard about Max and came by for a glimpse. In an odd way, Max had become a beacon of light, spreading warmth to an otherwise cold and somber hospital. "He's like an angel," an elderly patient said softly, stroking Max's golden fur as he sat beside her. "It's as if he knows who needs him most." That evening, Grace decided to stay overnight in the NICU again. She sat beside Lily's incubator while Max curled up at her feet. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside the room, an unusual calm prevailed. Watching Lily's steady heart rate on the monitor, Grace sighed in relief, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're doing a great job, Max," she whispered, gratitude filling her voice. Suddenly, Max stood up and approached Lily's incubator. He pressed his nose gently against the glass, letting out a soft, almost melodic whine. Grace leaned closer, sensing that something was happening. She peered down at Lily, and her breath caught in her throat. Lily's tiny eyelids fluttered, and for the first time since she was admitted, her eyes opened, small, fragile, but alive. Grace gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "Lily, oh, sweetheart." On the monitor, Lily's heart rate strengthened, rising with a rhythm that was steady and vibrant. Max stayed where he was, his gaze fixed on Lily as though silently telling her, "You can do this." That night, with Grace and Max watching over her, a miracle truly unfolded. Sometimes what science cannot yet explain is made real by the quiet power of love, an invisible strength that changes lives. In the dark of winter, Max's gentle presence had brought a new light of hope, and for Grace, she realized that this dog was not just an uninvited guest. Max was a miracle, a messenger of something sacred and unspoken beyond words. The gray sky cast a somber tone over St. Mary's Hospital as strong winds howled against the windows. Inside, the usual quiet of the NICU now carried an undercurrent of tension, an invisible conflict that no one openly discussed, but everyone could feel. Max, the mysterious golden retriever, lay patiently by Lily's incubator. Ever since his arrival, Lily's condition had miraculously improved, something Grace and even the most experienced nurses regarded as a blessing. However, Max's presence had divided the hospital into two distinct camps: those who believed he was something extraordinary and those who dismissed it as coincidence, or worse, a contamination risk. At the center of the storm stood Grace Thompson, the young nurse who had poured her heart into protecting Max and the inexplicable miracle surrounding Lily. "I don't understand why this situation has been allowed to continue," Dr. Thomas Gray's voice boomed through the emergency meeting held the following morning. The management boardroom was packed with nurses, doctors, and hospital administrators. A dog in the NICU, a place that requires absolute sterility. Nurse Thompson, what exactly do you think you're doing? Grace stood in the middle of the room, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, though her expression remained calm and resolute. She had known this day would come, and she had prepared herself to defend Max, no matter what. Dr. Gray, Grace began, her voice steady and clear. I know this sounds absurd, but the truth is, ever since Max appeared, Lily's heart rate and condition have improved dramatically. I can't explain it scientifically, but I believe Max is no ordinary dog. Dr. Gray's frown deepened, his eyes flashing with frustration. Your beliefs are not a basis for medical decisions, and this hospital does not operate on emotions or superstition. If Lily is stable, it's because of medicine and machines, not because of a dog. What about the things we can't explain? Grace countered, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Lily was unstable for days. I've seen it with my own eyes, Dr. Gray. When Max is near her, she calms down. Her breathing stabilizes. The room fell silent. Some of the nurses exchanged hesitant glances, their faces reflecting the unspoken truth. They had all seen something unusual, even if no one dared say it aloud. Regardless, Dr. Gray said firmly, breaking the tense silence, I've made my decision. The dog will be removed from the hospital immediately. I will not risk the lives of our patients over some misguided belief in a miracle. Grace opened her mouth to argue, but Dr. Gray's decision stood like an impenetrable wall. The meeting adjourned, leaving Grace alone with a growing sense of despair. That evening, Grace sat alone in the nurse's lounge, staring blankly into a cup of cold tea. Max was still in the NICU, but she knew his time there was running out. She couldn't let it end like this, without understanding the truth about the mysterious dog who had brought hope to Lily and perhaps to herself. She opened her laptop and began searching for information about Max. It didn't take long before she stumbled upon a story that sent shivers through her. Max had once been a therapy dog at a children's rehabilitation center in a nearby town. There, he had comforted countless children during their final days, offering them an unexplainable sense of peace and calm. Among those children was a boy named Michael, who suffered from a severe congenital heart condition. Michael survived longer than anyone expected, and his parents attributed it to Max's constant presence. Max had become Michael's only companion, a bridge between the boy and the world. But when Michael passed away 2 years ago, Max had disappeared without a trace. No one knew where he had gone, and his story faded into quiet obscurity. Staring at an old photograph of Max and Michael, Grace's vision blurred with tears. Max, you were there for Michael. And now you're here for Lily, aren't you? She whispered. The following morning, Dr. Gray signed the order to have Max removed from the hospital. A security guard was tasked with leading Max out of the NICU. Grace stood helplessly nearby, tears brimming in her eyes, knowing she was powerless to stop it. Max turned to look at her as if he understood what was happening. His soft brown eyes were filled with sadness, but also a quiet acceptance. Grace knelt down, wrapping her arms around Max's neck, her hands trembling as she stroked his golden fur. I'm so sorry, Max. I couldn't protect you, she choked out, her voice breaking. But I promise, I won't let your story be forgotten. The guard led Max away, his gentle steps echoing through the cold, sterile hallway. Grace watched until he disappeared from sight, her heart heavy with grief. The NICU felt colder than it ever had before. She turned back to Lily's incubator and froze. Lily's heart rate had begun to drop. The steady beeps on the monitor slowed, and the numbers dipped lower and lower. No, this can't be happening, Grace whispered, panic rising in her chest. An alarm blared, shattering the silence. Doctors and nurses rushed into the room, working frantically to stabilize Lily. But Grace knew what was wrong. She turned and sprinted down the hallway, her voice echoing through the corridors. "Max, Lily needs you," she cried, her breath ragged. The security guard turned, startled, but Max had already sensed it. The golden retriever pulled free from the guard's grip and bolted back down the hall, his paws thudding against the tiled floor with purpose. Grace ran alongside Max as he charged back into the NICU, stopping just short of Lily's incubator. He sat down, his gaze fixed on the fragile baby. Within seconds, the monitor's alarms quieted, and the numbers on the screen began to stabilize. The room fell silent as everyone turned to witness the impossible. Grace stood there, tears streaming down her face, watching as Lily's tiny chest rose and fell with renewed strength. Dr. Gray, who had entered moments later, stared at the scene, his face pale with disbelief. He looked at Grace, then at Max, and finally at the monitor. This isn't possible," he whispered. Grace wiped her tears, her voice soft but resolute. "Sometimes, Doctor, the things we can't explain are the ones we need to believe in the most." Max, the golden retriever who had appeared out of nowhere, lay down calmly beside Lily's incubator, his eyes full of a quiet wisdom that seemed to say, "Everything will be all right now." The NICU at St. Mary's Hospital seemed to hold its breath. The soft white lights illuminated the rows of incubators where tiny, fragile lives fought for every breath. But now, all eyes were fixed on Lily's incubator. The heart monitor beeped faintly, its rhythm slowing, like a flickering candle struggling against an invisible storm. Max, the mysterious golden retriever, lay calmly at the foot of Lily's incubator. His golden fur seemed to blend with the pale light, and his deep brown eyes remained fixed on Lily. He neither barked nor moved, but his presence was like an invisible thread anchoring the last strands of hope. Beside him knelt Grace Thompson, her hands trembling as they clenched together. Tears streamed silently down her face as she watched Lily's heart rate on the screen, dropping lower and lower. All their efforts, all their prayers, it felt as though they were slipping away. "Please, don't give up, Lily," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible, a desperate prayer against the crushing silence. Behind her, Dr. Thomas Gray stood stiffly, his usually unwavering demeanor strained under the weight of the moment. Though he had always trusted science, even he couldn't deny that something extraordinary was unfolding. His gaze flickered to Max, the silent guardian who seemed carved out of the air itself. Suddenly, the alarm blared, slicing through the stillness like a blade. The heart monitor's numbers plummeted, sending a wave of panic through the room. Doctors and nurses rushed to Lily's incubator, issuing rapid orders. "Prepare for CPR," a doctor shouted. "Emergency intubation now." The air grew heavy with tension, the flurry of movements blurring before Grace's tear-filled eyes. She stood frozen, watching her colleagues fight to save Lily's life, and yet, in her heart, she knew she had to do something. Max stirred. The dog's ears pricked up, his gaze sharpening. Without hesitation, he moved closer to the incubator, placing his front paws gently against its side. His eyes remained locked on Lily as though he were speaking to her. "Fight. Don't give up." "Grace, get that dog out of here now," Dr. Gray barked, his voice sharp with both anger and confusion. "No." Grace's voice rang out clear and unwavering, like a spark igniting in the darkness. "Please trust me. Just let Max stay. Just a little longer." Dr. Gray froze, his eyes meeting Grace's. In her tear-streaked face he saw something fierce and undeniable, an unshakable belief that defied reason. The room seemed suspended in time as he hesitated, then finally gave a small nod. All right. The room fell silent again save for the weak beeping of Lily's heart monitor. Max remained still, poised like a sentinel, his calm presence filling every corner of the room. Then it happened. A single beep. The heart monitor ticked upward. Then another. The rhythm grew stronger, steadier, a fragile but defiant pulse of life. The room collectively held its breath as Grace's tears fell freely. On the screen, the numbers began to rise, each one like a lifeline pulling Lily back. "Oh my God," a nurse whispered, her hands covering her mouth in disbelief. Dr. Gray stepped closer, his eyes wide as he examined the screen. The numbers were steady, the heart rate stabilizing. "She's responding," he murmured, his voice soft and trembling. "Her heart rate is normalizing." Max, as if sensing that his task was complete, let out a gentle whimper before stepping back. He lay down quietly beneath the incubator, curling into a calm, protective ball, his eyes half closed. After over an hour of tense effort, Lily's condition stabilized. Her tiny chest rose and fell rhythmically, her face now peaceful, as if cradled in an unseen warmth. Grace sank to the floor, utterly exhausted but overwhelmed with joy. She reached out, running her fingers through Max's fur as she whispered, "You did it, Max. You saved her." Dr. Gray stood silently, his usually stoic face softening as he took off his glasses and wiped at his eyes. For all his years of practicing medicine, he had never witnessed anything like this. Sometimes, he realized, the world defies explanation. Sometimes, love and belief carry a power far beyond science. "Thank you, Max," he said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "You truly are a miracle." By the next day, Lily's condition continued to improve, her vital signs stable and strong. Word of the miracle dog spread throughout the hospital and even beyond the small town, becoming a story whispered with wonder and gratitude. But by morning, Max was gone. No one saw him leave. It was as though he had vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. Staff searched the hospital and surrounding grounds, but there was no trace of the golden retriever who had saved Lily's life. Yet, Max's presence lingered, in the quiet beeping of Lily's heart monitor, in the warmth that now filled the NICU, and in the hearts of all who had witnessed the impossible. As Grace stood beside Lily's incubator watching the baby sleep soundly, she smiled through her tears. Max had left behind more than just a miracle. He had left a lesson that sometimes hope arrives in the most unexpected forms, and love transcends all understanding. Somewhere out there, Max had continued his journey, carrying his quiet magic with him, and those who had felt his presence knew one thing for certain. Miracles are not always loud. Sometimes they arrive on 4 silent paws and change everything. The sun slowly dipped behind the tall trees outside St. Mary's Hospital, casting a warm amber glow onto the ivory walls of the NICU. In this quiet space, the soft, steady beeping of Lily's heart monitor resonated like a gentle melody, soothing the hearts that had once ached with fear for her fragile life. Lily slept peacefully in her incubator, her tiny hands curled as though embracing a sweet dream. On her delicate face was tranquility Grace Thompson had never seen before. Standing beside the incubator, Grace gently placed her hand on the transparent glass, tears welling in her eyes. "She's safe now," Grace whispered, her voice soft as though speaking to herself, or to someone unseen. At her feet, an empty space still seemed to hold the lingering warmth of Max, the golden retriever who had brought one final miracle to Lily and to everyone at St. Mary's. Max had left that morning, quietly and mysteriously, just as he had appeared. No one knew where he had come from or where he had gone, but it no longer mattered. What he had left behind was far more precious than any explanation. A true miracle, one that defied logic and science. Since that day, Max's story spread far beyond the walls of the hospital, becoming a cherished tale in the small, peaceful town. Max was no longer just an unknown dog. To many, he was an angel, a messenger of love and hope. In the hospital's hallways, conversations about Max echoed daily. Even Dr. Thomas Gray, the once unyielding skeptic, had changed. One morning, as he stood by Lily's incubator, he watched her tiny fingers grasp her mother's hand, a soft smile forming on her face as she slept. Dr. Gray leaned down and said to Lily's mother, "She's a true warrior, and I think we all owe our gratitude to a very special dog." Lily's mother, tears streaming down her face, smiled through them. "I've heard about Max. Maybe he was the miracle we prayed for." Dr. Gray nodded silently, a rare gentleness softening his stern features. To him, Max was no longer something irrational or inexplicable. The dog had taught him a profound truth. Medicine could only go so far, but love and belief could empower people to endure the impossible. One late afternoon, Grace stood on the hospital's front steps, her gaze lost in the long, winding road ahead. It had been days since Max's departure, yet his image remained vivid in her mind. She remembered his deep, understanding eyes that seemed to know he had come to deliver a special gift. She smiled softly, her fingers clutching the small silver tag she had found the morning Max left. Engraved on it was a single word. Just one word, but it said everything. Since that day, Grace had been a different person. She was no longer the young nurse who doubted herself. Max had taught her that even in the darkest moments, a small spark of hope and love was enough to light up the world. She began working with animal therapy programs at the hospital, where dogs like Max brought joy and strength to children fighting illness. At every session, she shared Max and Lily's story, a tale of miracles, compassion, and the boundless power of love. St. Mary's Hospital honored Max's memory by placing a painting near the NICU entrance. The artwork depicted a golden retriever with warm, kind eyes, standing protectively by an incubator. Above it, a plaque read, "Every day, people passing the painting paused, smiling as they felt the warmth of its message. Parents of NICU babies drew strength from it, finding comfort in the belief that they were not alone." A father once held his premature son in his arms and whispered to his wife, "Max proves that sometimes miracles happen when we least expect them." That evening, as the sun faded, Grace sat on a park bench near the hospital. She opened a small notebook, its pages filled with everything she had written about Max since his arrival. On the very last page, she penned a final line. "Max taught me this. Miracles don't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes they appear in the form of a loyal friend, a gentle gaze, or a quiet hope in our darkest hours. Miracles don't need to be explained. They only need to be felt with the heart." A soft breeze rustled the pages of her notebook, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the sound of children's laughter in the distance. Grace looked up, and in the golden light of the setting sun, she thought she saw Max's silhouette. He was running free across an open field, ears flapping in the wind, his eyes filled with life and joy. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, a serene smile on her face. Somewhere in this vast world, dogs like Max continued to quietly work their magic, bringing miracles to those who needed them most. And for those who dared to believe, they would find that sometimes love and hope are all it takes to save a life. Miracles are not far away. They live within us, waiting for someone with enough love and patience to see them.